The stagecoach door slammed shut behind her, and Alara stood alone in the dust of Black Ridge, watching the only escape she'd ever have disappear into the horizon. The telegram clutched in her trembling hand was addressed to someone else, a woman who never came, a bride who had the good sense to run. But Alara had nowhere left to run. Behind her, the town square had gone silent. 30 pairs of eyes stared at the girl in the torn traveling dress, the imposter, the mistake. And at the edge of the crowd stood Garrett Hale, the rancher who'd been promised a different woman entirely, his jaw set like iron, his eyes cold as a Montana winter. That's where our story begins, with a woman who arrived at the wrong place to the wrong man at exactly the wrong time. But sometimes the wrong turn leads to the only road worth taking. Stay with me until the end of this journey, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The April wind cut through Alara's coat like it had a personal grudge. She'd been standing in front of the Black Ridge General Store for 20 minutes, and not a single person had offered to help with her suitcase. The leather handle dug into her palm, worn smooth from her mother's hands before hers, and now it was all she had left of anything that resembled home. "You the bride?" Alara turned. The woman asking was maybe 50, with a face that had seen hard weather and hadn't forgiven it. She wore an apron stained with what looked like berry juice or blood. Out here, Alara was learning, it was hard to tell the difference. "I'm Alara Frost," she said, which wasn't really an answer. "That ain't what I asked." The woman's eyes traveled down Alara's frame like she was livestock at auction. The traveling dress had been blue once, before the trains and the dust and the desperate weeks of running. Now it was the color of giving up. "Margaret Winters was supposed to arrive today," the woman said. "Promised bride to Garrett Hale. You look lost, girl. You look like you got on the wrong stage in the wrong state and ended up in the wrong damn life." "Margaret isn't coming." The words hung in the air between them. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A child laughed. Normal sounds in a normal town that would never be normal for Alara again. "Well," the woman wiped her hands on her apron, spreading the stains around. "That's going to be a problem." That was when the crowd started to gather. It wasn't coordinated, wasn't planned. Just the way small towns worked when something interesting happened, which out here meant anything that broke the rhythm of feeding cattle and praying for rain. They came out of the store, the saloon, the feed shop. Men in work boots and women in simple dresses, all of them looking at Alara like she was a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "Where is she?" A man's voice, rough as gravel. Alara didn't have to ask who he meant. She turned and saw him for the first time. Garrett Hale, the man whose name had been on the telegram, the rancher who'd paid for Margaret's passage west, who'd been promised a bride to help run his land and warm his bed and give him children to inherit the empire he'd built from nothing. He was taller than she'd expected, broader, the kind of man who looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains behind him. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see his eyes, gray and flat and completely unreadable. "She's not coming," Alara said again. "Then who the hell are you?" The crowd pressed closer. Alara could smell them now, sweat and leather and the sharp tang of whiskey from the men who'd spilled out of the saloon. This was entertainment. This was the most exciting thing that had happened in Black Ridge since the Miller boy shot himself in the foot trying to impress a girl from the next county over. "I'm her sister." It wasn't technically a lie. Margaret had been like a sister back in Philadelphia, back when they'd both worked at the dress shop and dreamed about lives that didn't involve stitching hems for women who treated them like furniture. When Margaret had shown Alara the advertisement, "Rancher seeks bride. Must be of good character and strong constitution. Room and board provided. Respond to G. Hale, Black Ridge, Montana Territory." They'd laughed about it, until Margaret had actually responded. And when the money for the train ticket arrived, Margaret had looked at that telegram like it was a death sentence instead of a new beginning. "I can't go," Margaret had whispered the night before the departure. "Alara, I can't. He sounds hard, like the land out there. I'll die in a place like that." "So you sent me instead." Garrett's voice cut through the memory. He'd moved closer, and Alara could see his face now, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked like it had forgotten how to relax, a scar above his left eyebrow that was old and white and probably had a story she'd never hear. "She didn't send me. I came because you thought you could trick a rancher into marrying the wrong woman?" A man in the crowd said it, and laughter rippled through the gathering. No, Alara's hands tightened on the suitcase handle, because I had nowhere else to go. The laughter died. Honesty had that effect sometimes. It made people uncomfortable, made them look away because facing someone else's desperation meant acknowledging their own. Garrett stared at her. You're telling me you got on a train for 3 days, crossed half the country, came to a town you'd never heard of, to marry a man you've never met, all because you had nowhere else to go? Yes, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Probably, Alara agreed, but it's the truth. He turned away and she thought that was it. He'd walk back to his horse, ride back to his ranch, leave her standing here with her suitcase and her stupid decisions. The crowd would disperse. The woman with the stained apron would tell her the next stage east didn't run until Thursday. And by Thursday, Alara would be starving in the street because she had exactly 14 cents in her pocket and no way to earn more. But Garrett stopped, turned back. You cook? Yes. Clean? Yes. Work without complaining? I don't complain about work, Alara said. I complain about liars and cheats and men who think women are property, but I've never complained about honest work in my life. Someone in the crowd whistled. She's got a mouth on her. Garrett's expression didn't change. Can you ride a horse? No. Shoot a rifle? No. Birth a calf? Mend a fence? Treat livestock for worms? No, no, and no. Alara lifted her chin. But I can learn. I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Hale. I'm not afraid of blood or dirt or long days. I can read and write and do figures. I can sew and garden, and I know 17 different ways to cook potatoes. I don't drink, I don't steal, and I don't lie unless the truth would get someone killed. That's a hell of a qualification. I've lived a hell of a life. They stared at each other. The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning down the main street. Somewhere a shutter banged against a wall with a rhythm like a broken heartbeat. You'll work for room and board, Garrett said finally. You'll earn your keep like any ranch hand. You'll do what you're told, when you're told, and if you can't handle it, you'll leave. Those are the terms. What about the marriage? His jaw tightened. There is no marriage. Margaret Winters was supposed to be my wife. You're not Margaret Winters. You're just a girl with nowhere else to go who needs a roof over her head. I've got a ranch that needs work. That's the arrangement. It wasn't what she'd expected. Wasn't what Margaret's telegram had promised. But Alara had learned a long time ago that promises were just words people said before they broke your heart. All right. All right? Garrett looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Just like that? Just like that. Alara picked up her suitcase. Where's your ranch? Thuds. The ride to the ranch was silent except for the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horse's hooves. Garrett had loaded her suitcase in the back without a word, then climbed up onto the bench seat and waited until she figured out how to haul herself up beside him. He didn't offer to help, didn't even look at her. The town fell away behind them, and Alara watched it go with a strange sense of finality. She'd burned her bridges in Philadelphia, burned them so completely there wasn't even ash left. Coming west had been her last option, her final desperate gamble that somewhere in this huge country there was a place she could belong. Looking at the endless expanse of prairie stretching out in every direction, she wasn't sure she'd gambled right. You really have nowhere to go? Garrett asked after an hour of silence. Really? Family? Dead. Friends? Not the kind who'd take me in. He was quiet for a long moment. What happened to you, girl? Alara watched the mountains in the distance, purple and gold in the afternoon light. The same thing that happens to most women with no money and no protection. Men who thought they could take what they wanted. Employers who paid in promises instead of wages. A city that eats you alive if you're not strong enough to fight back. You fight back? Not hard enough. She touched her ribs without thinking, where the bruises had finally faded to yellow. But I'm still here. That counts for something. Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. The man who did that to you is not your problem, Mr. Hale. And he's not mine anymore either. I'm here. He's there. That's all that matters. They drove in silence after that. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like the world was bleeding out. Alara had never seen so much sky before. In Philadelphia, the buildings pressed close, cutting the world into narrow slices of gray. Out here, the sky went on forever, and it made her feel small and exposed and somehow free all at once. There, Garrett pointed, and Alara followed his gaze. The ranch sprawled across a valley between two low hills, larger than she'd expected. The main house was 2 stories, built from dark wood that had weathered to silver in places. A barn stood off to one side, and beyond it she could see fenced pastures where cattle grazed, dark shapes against the golden grass. It should have looked welcoming. It should have looked like the fresh start she'd been promised. Instead, it looked lonely. "It's big," Alara said. 2,000 acres. There was pride in Garrett's voice, the first emotion she'd heard from him. "Built it from nothing, started with 20 head of cattle and a tent. Now I run 300 head, employ 6 men, supply beef to half the territory." "Your wife must have been proud." The pride vanished like she'd snuffed out a candle. "My wife is dead." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You didn't know her." He snapped the reins, urging the horse faster. "And you won't talk about her. That's another rule. You work, you stay out of my way, and you don't ask questions about things that aren't your business." Alara bit back the response that wanted to come out. She was good at that, swallowing words, keeping her mouth shut, surviving. It was a skill she'd learned young and perfected over years of hard practice. The wagon pulled up in front of the main house, and Garrett jumped down without waiting for her. He grabbed her suitcase from the back and headed for the door, leaving Alara to climb down on her own. She managed it, though not gracefully, and followed him up the wooden steps to the porch. Inside, the house was dark and cold. Not cold from the temperature, the afternoon was still warm, but cold in the way places get when nobody loves them anymore. The furniture was heavy and practical, the kind built to last rather than to comfort. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, no photographs on the walls or books on the shelves or any of the small things that made a house a home. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right." Garrett set her suitcase down at the base of the stairs. "Dinner's at 6. You'll cook it. Kitchen is through there." He pointed to a doorway off the main room. "Pantry is stocked. If you need something we don't have, make a list and I'll pick it up next time I'm in town." "What do you want me to cook?" "Food. I'm not particular." He headed for the door, then stopped. "The men eat in the bunkhouse. You'll cook for them too. Breakfast and dinner. Lunch they handle themselves. Breakfast is at 5. 5 in the morning? This is a ranch, not a boarding house. We work at dawn." He opened the door, then paused again. "One more thing. Stay out of the west wing. That's my private space. You've got the rest of the house, but the west wing is off limits. Understood?" "Understood." He left. The door closed behind him, and Alara stood alone in the cold, dark house, listening to the silence press in around her. She'd made it. She'd traveled across the country, lied her way into a dead woman's life, and now she was standing in a stranger's house with 14 cents in her pocket and nowhere to run. It should have felt like failure. Instead, for the first time in months, Alara felt something that might have been hope. Gokan. The kitchen was worse than the main room. Not dirty exactly, but neglected. The kind of neglect that came from men who cooked only what was necessary and cleaned only when the mess became unbearable. Dishes were stacked in the dry sink, some of them crusted with food that looked several days old. The stove was covered in grease. The floor needed sweeping. Alara rolled up her sleeves. The pantry, at least, was well stocked. Flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, coffee, canned goods. A root cellar held potatoes, onions, carrots. There was a smokehouse out back. She could see it through the kitchen window, which probably meant preserved meat. It was more than she'd had to work with in months. She found a pot, filled it with water from the pump, and set it on the stove to boil. While she waited, she started on the dishes. The water was cold and her hands were already raw from travel, but she scrubbed until each plate was clean, until the stack in the dry sink became a stack in the cupboard. By the time 6 o'clock came around, she'd made a simple stew, potatoes, carrots, onions, and some of the dried beef she'd found in the smokehouse. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, and it filled the kitchen with a smell that almost made the house feel lived in. Garrett came in without knocking, bringing the smell of horse and leather with him. He'd washed. She could see the water still beating on his neck, but he hadn't changed his clothes. He looked at the pot on the stove, then at Alara. "Smells good." "Thank you." He served himself without ceremony, filling a bowl to the rim and sitting down at the kitchen table. Alara waited, uncertain. Should she eat? Was she supposed to wait until he finished? The rules here were different from anything she'd known, and nobody had bothered to explain them. Well? Garrett looked up at her. You gonna stand there all night or eat? She got herself a bowl and sat down across from him. The stew was good. Not great, but solid and filling. She'd made worse with less. They ate in silence. Outside, the sun was setting, and through the kitchen window, Alara could see the sky turning purple. In the distance, she heard men's voices. The ranch hands, probably, heading to their own dinner in the bunkhouse. The men will expect breakfast at 5, Garrett said without looking up. That's Frank, Miguel, Charlie, and the 2 new boys whose names I can't remember. They'll eat anything, but they eat a lot. You'll need to make extra. All right. After breakfast, you'll clean the house. All of it except the west wing. Then you'll start on whatever needs doing, laundry, mending, garden work if you know how. I know how. He glanced at her. The garden is dead, has been for 2 years. I can bring it back. That's ambitious. I'm good with plants. It was true. Back in Philadelphia, Alara had kept a window box of herbs that had somehow survived despite the pollution and the cramped conditions. Growing things was one of the few skills she had that felt like more than just survival. Garrett grunted, which could have meant anything. He finished his stew and stood, taking his bowl to the dry sink. I'll be in the barn until late. Lock the doors when you go to bed. Is that necessary? Out here? Probably not, but my wife always locked the doors, and I got used to it. He was already at the door when he said it, already halfway gone. Good night, Miss Frost. Good night, Mr. Hale. And then she was alone again. The room Garrett had assigned her was small but clean. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the pastures. Someone had left a quilt folded at the foot of the bed, old but beautiful, pieced together from scraps of fabric in a pattern that must have taken months to complete. Alara ran her hand over it and wondered who had made it. Garrett's wife, probably. The woman whose name she still didn't know, whose presence haunted this house like a ghost. She unpacked her suitcase, which didn't take long. 2 dresses, both worn, a spare set of undergarments, a small leather journal her mother had given her before she died, a photograph of her parents, the edges bent and faded. That was it. That was everything she owned in the world. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed. The mattress was lumpy, but better than some of the places she'd slept recently. Through the window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing, horses moving in the barn, the distant yip of a coyote. Alara closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Instead, she thought about Margaret, safe in Philadelphia, probably congratulating herself on her narrow escape. Margaret, who'd taken one look at Garrett Hale's cold proposition and decided she'd rather stay poor than risk the frontier. Margaret, who had no idea what real risk looked like. Alara had left Philadelphia with bruises on her ribs and fear in her throat and 14 cents to her name. She'd climbed onto a train heading west because west was the only direction she had left. And when Margaret's courage had failed, when the ticket and the telegram had been there for the taking, Alara had made a choice. A bad choice, probably. But it was hers. She drifted off to sleep thinking about gardens and second chances and didn't dream at all. The rooster woke her at 4:30. Alara dragged herself out of bed, still exhausted from the journey, and fumbled her way into a dress by lamplight. The house was dark and silent, and for a moment she wasn't sure she was in the right place. Wasn't sure any of this was real. Then she smelled coffee. She followed the scent downstairs and found Garrett in the kitchen, already dressed, pouring himself a cup from a pot he must have made himself. He looked up when she came in. "You're early. I heard the rooster." Most people curse the rooster and go back to sleep their first day. I'm not most people. Starting to figure that out. He poured a second cup and handed it to her. "Drink this. You'll need it." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but Alara drank it anyway. The warmth spread through her chest, waking up parts of her that had been numb since the journey started. "I'll bring the men over at 5, Garrett said. "They'll expect eggs, meat, potatoes, biscuits if you know how to make them." "I know how." He nodded and left, and Alara got to work. By 5 o'clock, she had a spread laid out that would have fed twice as many men. Scrambled eggs, spugs, fried salt pork, a mountain of biscuits, and enough coffee to float a small boat. When the ranch hands filed in, they looked at the food and then at her with expressions that ranged from surprise to suspicion. "Boys, this is Miss Frost," Garrett said without preamble. "She'll be cooking and keeping house. You'll treat her with respect or you'll find work somewhere else. Clear?" A chorus of "yes, sir" went around the table. The men sat down and started eating, and Alara watched them devour her cooking with a satisfaction that surprised her. She'd been feeding herself for so long that feeding others felt strange and good and almost like purpose. The first man to speak was young, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. "These biscuits are damn good, miss, begging your pardon for the language." "I've heard worse," Alara said. An older man with gray in his beard laughed. "I bet you have." "Frank Miller," he said, extending a hand. "Been working this ranch since before it was a ranch. This here is Miguel, Charlie, and the two boys are Danny and Tom." Alara shook his hand. Miguel nodded at her, a quiet man with dark eyes that saw too much. Charlie was thin and nervous looking, the kind of person who seemed like he was always apologizing for taking up space. Danny and Tom were both young and sunburned and interchangeable. "Pleasure to meet you all," Alara said. "You the bride that was supposed to come?" Danny asked with the bluntness of youth. The kitchen went silent. Garrett's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "No," Alara said calmly. "I'm the woman who came instead." "But you're staying." "I'm staying." Danny looked like he wanted to ask more questions, but Frank kicked him under the table hard enough that Danny yelped. "Eat your breakfast, boy, before I feed it to the pigs." The meal continued in relative quiet after that. The men ate until the platters were empty, then headed out to start the day's work. Frank was the last to leave, and he stopped at the door. "You did good, miss. Real good. We ain't had cooking like this since—" He trailed off, glancing at Garrett. "Since my wife died," Garrett finished. "You can say it, Frank. It's not a secret." "No, sir, it ain't." Frank nodded at Alara. "Welcome to the ranch, Miss Frost. I hope you stick around." He left, and Alara started cleaning up the breakfast dishes. Garrett stayed at the table, drinking his coffee and watching her in a way that made her self-conscious. "You didn't have to make all that," he said finally. "You said they'd be hungry." "They're always hungry, but my wife used to—" He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind." "Used to what?" "I said never mind." He stood up, draining the last of his coffee. "I'll be out in the north pasture today. If you need anything, ring the bell on the porch. Someone will hear it." "Mr. Hale?" He paused. "Your wife," Alara said carefully. "What was her name?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. His jaw was tight, his eyes somewhere else. "Catherine," he said finally. Her name was Catherine. Then he was gone, and Alara was alone with a sink full of dishes and a dead woman's name echoing in her head. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning. The house fought her every step of the way. Dust that had settled into every corner, grime on the windows that wouldn't come off without serious scrubbing, floors that hadn't been properly swept in what looked like months. But Alara was good at fighting, and she was good at not giving up. By noon, the main room looked almost livable. She'd opened the windows to let in fresh air, swept and mopped the floors, dusted the furniture. It still felt empty, still felt cold, but at least it was clean. The west wing door mocked her from across the hallway. Off limits, Garrett had said. His private space. Alara had never been good at following rules she didn't understand. She didn't open the door. Not that first day. But she thought about it. Instead, she went outside to look at the garden. It was worse than she'd expected. What had once been organized rows of vegetables and herbs was now a tangle of dead plants and weeds. The fence around it had fallen in places. The gate hung crooked on rusted hinges. But the soil was good. Alara could tell that much just by looking. Dark and rich. The kind of soil that would grow anything if you gave it half a chance. She found tools in the barn. A spade, a hoe, a rake. They were old but serviceable, and she carried them back to the garden with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She started with the weeds, pulled them up by the roots, shaking off the dirt, tossing them into a pile that grew taller as the afternoon wore on. Her hands blistered, her back ached. The sun beat down on her shoulders until she was sure she'd burn. She didn't stop. "What are you doing?" Alara looked up to find Miguel standing at the garden fence, watching her with his quiet, dark eyes. "Clearing the garden. Boss know you're doing this?" He said I could work on it. Miguel nodded slowly. This was Mrs. Hale's garden. She worked it every day before she got sick. After she died, the boss wouldn't let anyone touch it, said it should die with her. Alara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. He told me I could bring it back. Did he? Miguel looked at the pile of weeds, the cleared patches of soil. Maybe he's changing his mind about some things. Maybe. Miguel reached down and pulled up a stubborn clump of grass that Alara had been fighting. I'll help, just for today. Can't let you do all this alone. You don't have to. I know. But Mrs. Hale was kind to me when I first came here, didn't speak much English, didn't know the work. She taught me, patient as anything. If her garden can live again, I'd like to help make that happen. So they worked together through the afternoon, two people with nothing in common except a dead woman's garden and the stubborn refusal to let things stay broken. By evening, half the garden was clear. Alara's hands were bloody and her dress was filthy, and she'd never felt more satisfied in her life. She made dinner, roast chicken with vegetables, more biscuits, apple pie from the canned fruit she'd found in the pantry. The men came in hungry and tired and ate like they'd been starving, and Alara felt that same strange satisfaction again. Garrett ate in silence, but when he left, he stopped at the door. Thank you for dinner. It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything. You're welcome. He hesitated, like there was more he wanted to say. Instead, he just nodded and left. Alara cleaned up the kitchen, locked the doors like Garrett had told her to, and climbed the stairs to her small room. She fell asleep before she could even blow out the lamp, and this time she did dream, of gardens growing wild and houses coming back to life, and a man with gray eyes learning how to smile again. Sulk. The days fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, breakfast for the men, cleaning and cooking and slowly bringing the house back from the dead. Alara worked like she was trying to outrun something, and maybe she was. Every moment she spent working was a moment she wasn't thinking about Philadelphia, about the men who'd hurt her, about the desperate gamble that had brought her here. The garden grew under her hands. Miguel helped when he could, and eventually Charlie joined them, quiet and nervous, but good at following directions. They planted potatoes and carrots and beans, seeds Garrett brought back from town without being asked. The rows straightened. The fence got repaired. The gate hung true again. The ranch hand stopped looking at her like she was an intruder and started looking at her like she was part of the place. Frank told her stories about the early days of the ranch while she cooked. Danny and Tom competed to see who could carry more firewood for her. Even quiet Miguel started leaving wildflowers on the kitchen windowsill, small bright things that made the room feel less empty. But Garrett remained distant. Polite, but distant. He thanked her for meals, complimented her work on the house, noticed when she mended his torn shirt without being asked. But there was a wall between them that Alara couldn't breach, built from grief and guilt and a dead woman's memory. 2 weeks after her arrival, Alara was bringing in laundry from the line when she heard shouting from the barn. She dropped the basket and ran. Inside the barn, she found Garrett and Frank standing over a young calf that was lying on its side, breathing hard and fast. Its eyes were rolling, showing white, and even from a distance, Alara could see it was in trouble. Damn it, Garrett was saying. Not another one. That's 3 this month. What's wrong with it? Alara asked. Scours, Frank said grimly. It'll be dead by morning if we can't stop it. Alara knelt beside the calf, ignoring the straw and the dirt and the smell. She'd seen this before. Back in Philadelphia, a street vendor had kept goats behind his shop, and Alara had helped him nurse one back to health when it had gotten sick from bad water. Do you have honey? She asked. Garrett stared at her. What? Honey and salt and clean water. Miss Frost, this ain't the time for, I can help. She looked up at Garrett. I know you don't have any reason to trust me, but I've seen this before. If you've got honey and salt, I can try. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Frank, get what she needs. Frank hurried off, and Alara stayed with the calf, stroking its neck, murmuring soft nonsense words that seemed to calm it a little. Garrett crouched beside her. If it dies, then it dies, Alara said. But at least we tried. Frank came back with the supplies, and Alara mixed them together. Honey for energy, salt for dehydration, water to carry it down. She managed to get some into the calf's mouth, massaging its throat to make it swallow. Most of it dribbled out, but some went down. "Keep it warm," she said, "and keep giving it this mixture every hour, small amounts. If it makes it through the night, it might make it through." "I'll stay with it," Frank said, but Garrett shook his head. "No, I will." Frank looked surprised, but didn't argue. "Yes, sir." Alara stood, her dress covered in who knows what. "I should let you stay." It wasn't a request, and Alara found herself settling back down in the straw. They sat on opposite sides of the calf, and every hour Garrett gave it more of the mixture Alara had made. She didn't know if it would work, didn't know if the calf was too far gone. But somewhere around midnight, its breathing eased. The rolling eyes calmed. It lifted its head just a little and looked at them with something that might have been hope. "I'll be damned," Garrett said softly. "Don't celebrate yet. It's not out of danger." "But it's fighting." He looked at her across the calf's body. "How did you know how to do that?" "I told you. I've seen it before." "In Philadelphia?" "In Philadelphia." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the calf breathe, watching the lamp throw shadows on the barn walls. "I was wrong about you," Garrett said finally. "About what?" "I thought you were just another city girl who'd last about a week before running back east. Thought you'd take one look at real work and quit." He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "But you haven't quit. You've worked harder than some men I've hired. The house looks better than it has in 2 years. The garden is coming back. And now you're sitting in a barn at midnight trying to save a dying calf." "I told you I wasn't afraid of work." "You did. I should have listened." He paused. "Catherine, my wife, she would have liked you." It was the first time he'd mentioned her voluntarily, and Alara held very still, afraid to break the moment. "She loved the ranch," Garrett continued. "Loved the work, the animals, the land. City people thought she was crazy for marrying a rancher and moving out here, but she never regretted it. She used to say," his voice caught, "she used to say the ranch had a heartbeat, and if you listened close enough, you could hear it." "What happened to her?" "Fever. Started with a cold, turned into something worse. By the time we got a doctor out here, it was too late." His hands clenched. "I should have taken her to town sooner, should have known it was serious. But she kept saying she was fine, kept working until she couldn't stand up anymore, and then, it wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a pain so raw it hurt to witness. "I brought her out here, put her in the middle of nowhere, miles from a real doctor, and when she got sick, I was too stupid to save her." Alara thought about all the things she could say. Empty platitudes about fate and timing, useless words that wouldn't change anything. Instead, she said, "She chose to come here, chose to stay. That was her decision, not yours. And I bet if you asked her, even knowing how it would end, she wouldn't choose differently." Garrett was quiet for a long time. "How do you know that?" "Because I wouldn't." Alara met his eyes across the calf. "If someone offered me a chance to avoid all the pain I've been through, all the bad choices and the hurt, but it meant I'd never have learned what I learned, never have become who I am, I'd say no. The hard things make us who we are. I think your Catherine knew that." He didn't respond, but something in his expression softened. They stayed in the barn until dawn, taking turns with the mixture, watching the calf slowly come back to life. And when the sun finally rose and the calf struggled to its feet on shaky legs, Garrett smiled, a real smile, the first Alara had seen from him. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." They walked back to the house together in the early morning light, and for the first time since arriving at Black Ridge, Alara felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice after all. The calf's recovery became the talk of the ranch. Frank spread the word to the other hands, and soon everyone knew that the city girl who couldn't ride or shoot had saved one of Garrett's best calves with nothing but honey and stubbornness. Danny started calling her Doc, which made Alara laugh every time. Even Miguel, who barely spoke to anyone, nodded at her with something that looked like respect. But respect didn't mean acceptance. The town of Black Ridge still whispered when she drove in with Garrett for supplies. The women at the general store stopped talking when she walked past. The men looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment that made her skin crawl. "Don't pay them any mind," Frank told her one morning while she was kneading bread dough in the kitchen. He'd come in early to grab coffee and found her already working. "Small towns got small minds sometimes. I'm used to it." "Don't mean it's right." He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter. For what it's worth, you've done more for this ranch in a month than anyone since Catherine died. The boss is different now. Still got that stone face most of the time, but I've seen him smile twice in the last week. Before you came, I hadn't seen him smile in 2 years. Alara punched down the dough harder than necessary. I'm not trying to replace her. Didn't say you were, but maybe the ranch needed someone who wasn't trying to replace her. Someone who was just trying to live. He drained his coffee and headed for the door. Storm's coming tonight, by the way. Big one. Boss will want everything battened down before it hits. He was right about the storm. By afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, and the wind was picking up in gusts that sent dust devils spinning across the yard. Garrett came in from the pastures early, his face tight with worry. We need to get the horses into the barn, he said without preamble. Frank and Miguel are bringing in the cattle, but we're short-handed with Danny and Tom gone to town. Can you help? I told you I can't ride. You don't need to ride, just help me move them from the corral to the barn. They know the way. You just need to keep them moving. Alara wiped her hands on her apron and followed him outside. The wind was stronger now, whipping her skirts around her legs and tearing loose strands of hair from her bun. The horses in the corral were nervous, moving in tight circles, their ears flat against their heads. Stay behind them, Garrett instructed. Move slow, talk calm. They're already spooked from the weather. Don't make it worse. It sounded simple enough. But the moment Alara stepped into the corral, one of the horses, a big bay gelding, reared up and came down hard, hooves churning the dirt uncomfortably close to where she stood. Easy, she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. Easy now. The horse snorted and backed away, eyes rolling. The other horses picked up on its fear, and suddenly the whole corral was chaos, animals spinning and kicking and threatening to break through the fence. Get out of there, Garrett shouted, but Alara couldn't move. She was frozen, watching the bay rear again, watching those hooves come down like hammers, watching death approach in slow motion. Then Garrett was there, grabbing her around the waist and hauling her backward out of the corral. They hit the ground hard on the other side of the fence, and Alara felt the air leave her lungs in a painful rush. What the hell were you thinking? Garrett was still holding her, his face inches from hers, his eyes blazing. You could have been killed. I was doing what you told me to do. I told you to move slow and stay calm, not stand there like a damn statue while 1,000 pounds of panicked horse tried to crush your skull. He let go of her and stood, running both hands through his hair. Christ, Alara. It was the first time he'd used her first name. I'm sorry, she said, getting to her feet on shaky legs. I didn't know. No, you didn't. Because you're from the city and you don't know horses, and I should never have asked you to help with this. He turned away, shoulders tight. Go back to the house. I'll handle it. Let me try again. No. I can do better. I just need... I said no! He spun back to face her, and the fear in his eyes was worse than the anger. I'm not watching another woman die on this ranch. Do you understand? I can't. So go inside, lock the doors, and stay there until the storm passes. He walked away before she could respond, and Alara stood alone in the rising wind, feeling like she'd failed some test she hadn't known she was taking. Inside the house, she paced. The storm hit hard around 7, rain coming down in sheets so thick she couldn't see the barn from the kitchen window. Thunder rolled across the valley like cannon fire, and lightning turned the world white bright for split seconds at a time. She made dinner, though she doubted anyone would come in to eat it. The stew sat cooling on the stove while she watched the storm, and tried not to think about Garrett out there in the weather. Tried not to imagine all the ways things could go wrong. At 9 o'clock, the kitchen door slammed open and Frank stumbled in, soaked to the bone and breathing hard. We need you, he said without preamble. What's wrong? It's the mare, Garrett's prize breeding mare. She's foaling early and it's going wrong. The boss is in the barn trying to save her, but she's struggling and the foal's stuck and... He grabbed her arm. He needs help, real help, and you're the only one here who's got gentle hands. I don't know anything about birthing horses. You knew enough to save that calf. Please, Miss Frost. If we lose this mare, it'll break him. She's the last horse Catherine picked out before she died. If she goes... Frank didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Alara grabbed her shawl and ran. The barn was chaos when they arrived. The mare was down on her side in one of the large stalls, her coat dark with sweat, her breathing labored. Garrett was at her head, talking to her in a low voice, but Alara could see the fear in every line of his body. Miguel was at the mare's hindquarters, his hands slick with blood, his face grim. The foal is turned wrong. I can't get it positioned right, and she's getting weaker. Let me try, Alara heard herself say. Garrett looked up, surprised to see her. You shouldn't be here. Frank said you needed help. Not your help. You'll get hurt. Then I'll get hurt. Alara knelt beside Miguel, ignoring the mud and the blood and the smell. Show me what to do. Miguel looked at Garrett, who hesitated, then nodded. All right, but if I tell you to move, you move. Understand? I understand. Miguel guided her hands, telling her what to feel for, how to position the foal, where to push, and where to pull. It was terrifying and disgusting and nothing like anything Alara had ever done before. The mare groaned, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest, and tried to kick. Garrett held her head, murmuring constantly, keeping her as calm as possible. I've got it, Alara said suddenly. I can feel… Miguel, is this right? He checked quickly. Yes. Now we wait for the next contraction and help her push. Be ready. The next contraction came like a wave, and the mare screamed. Alara pulled, following Miguel's instructions, feeling the foal move under her hands. It was stuck, wedged tight, and for a horrible moment she thought they were going to lose both animals. Then something shifted. The foal moved just a little, and Miguel said, Again! Next contraction! Pull harder! The mare pushed, Alara pulled, and suddenly there was movement, real movement, and the foal was coming, slick and dark and impossibly fragile. It slid into Alara's arms in a rush of fluid and blood, and she fell backward into the straw, cradling the tiny creature against her chest. For a moment, nobody moved. The foal wasn't breathing. No, Garrett said. No, come on. Alara cleared the foal's nose and mouth, the way she'd seen a midwife do once for a baby that wasn't crying. She rubbed its chest hard, willing it to breathe, to live, to fight. The foal gasped, coughed, took a shaky breath, and then another. It's alive, Miguel said, and his voice was shaking. Santa Maria, it's alive. The mare lifted her head, nickering softly, and Alara carefully moved the foal closer so the mother could see her baby. The mare began to lick the foal clean, and the little one struggled to stand on impossibly long legs that didn't quite work right yet. Garrett was staring at Alara like he'd never seen her before. You did it. We all did it. No. He stood, crossed the stall, and pulled her to her feet. You did it. Miguel couldn't get the position right. His hands are too big. Frank can't reach far enough. I was useless at her head. You're the only one who could have saved them. Alara looked down at herself. She was covered in blood and birth fluid and things she didn't want to identify. Her dress was ruined. Her hands were shaking. I need to sit down. Here. Garrett guided her to a hay bale outside the stall. Sit. Frank, get her some water. She sat, and the reality of what had just happened hit her all at once. She'd helped birth a horse. She'd saved 2 lives. She'd done something she never would have imagined herself capable of doing, and somehow she'd succeeded. Why did you come? Garrett asked quietly. I told you to stay in the house. Frank said you needed help. And you just came? Without knowing if you could actually help, without knowing anything about horses, you just ran out into a storm because someone said I needed you? Yes. He shook his head slowly. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest. Can't I be both? That surprised a laugh out of him, a real laugh, rough and rusty but genuine. Yeah, I guess you can be both. They sat in silence for a while, watching the mare and foal through the stall bars. The storm was still raging outside, but in the barn it felt safe and warm and almost peaceful. Her name was Catherine, Garrett said suddenly. My wife. I know I told you that before, but I don't think I've really talked about her since she died. Felt like talking about her would make it hurt worse, you know? Like if I didn't say her name out loud, maybe I could pretend it never happened. Did it work? No. Just made the hurt different. Made it the kind of hurt that sits in your chest like a stone and never goes away because you never let it breathe. He was quiet for a moment. She would have liked you. I keep thinking that. You're different from her in a lot of ways. She was bold where you're quiet, loud where you're reserved. But you've got the same kind of strength. The kind that doesn't quit even when quitting would make sense. I'm not strong, Alara said. I'm just stubborn. Catherine used to say the same thing. He looked at her, and in the lamplight his eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them. Thank you. For saving the mare. For saving the calf. For bringing the garden back and making the house feel like a home again, and for being too stubborn to give up when any reasonable person would have run back east weeks ago. You're welcome. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and the gesture was so gentle, so unexpected, that Alara's breath caught in her throat. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and she didn't know if she wanted him to or not. Then Frank coughed loudly from the barn doorway, breaking the spell. Storm's passing. We should check on the other animals before we call it a night. Garrett stood, the moment gone. You're right. Miss Frost, you should get back to the house and clean up. You've done more than enough for one night. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to stay, wanted to understand what had just passed between them, but she was exhausted and filthy, and her hands were starting to hurt from the work they'd done, so she just nodded and headed for the door. Alara? She turned back. Garrett was standing in the lamplight, looking like he was trying to find words for something he didn't know how to say. Sleep well, he said finally. You too. It wasn't what either of them had wanted to say, but it was enough for now. The walk back to the house was cold and wet, but Alara barely noticed. She was too busy replaying the evening in her mind. The terror of the mare's struggle, the miracle of the foal's first breath, the way Garrett had looked at her like she was something precious instead of something he'd been stuck with. She cleaned up as best she could with cold water and a washcloth, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the foal being born, felt the weight of it in her arms, remembered the sound Garrett's voice had made when he thanked her. Somewhere around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside her door and she held her breath, waiting. But whoever it was didn't knock. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated, and Alara was left alone with her racing heart and her confused thoughts. The next morning, she woke to find a cup of coffee waiting outside her door. It was still warm, which meant whoever had left it hadn't been gone long. Beside it was a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. Thank you, G. It was a small thing, a simple gesture, but it made Alara smile all the same. Breakfast was louder than usual. The ranch hands were buzzing with excitement about the new foal, and they peppered Alara with questions until Garrett finally told them to shut up and eat. But he was smiling when he said it, and that made all the difference. What are you going to name her? Charlie asked. The foal, I mean. Garrett looked at Alara. What do you think? Me? I don't know anything about naming horses. You saved her life. Seems like you've earned the right to name her. Alara thought about it, about the storm and the struggle and the moment when everything had hung in the balance. Hope, she said finally. Her name should be Hope. Hope it is, Garrett agreed. After breakfast, Alara tackled the house with renewed energy. The main rooms were clean now, but there were still bedrooms that needed attention, windows that needed washing, linens that needed mending. She worked through the morning, and by noon she'd made significant progress. That's when she noticed the door to the west wing was standing open. She'd walked past it 100 times in the last month, always closed, always locked, always off limits. But now it stood ajar, and through the gap she could see a hallway lined with closed doors. Alara knew she should walk away, should close the door and pretend she'd never seen it open. But curiosity was a powerful thing, and before she could talk herself out of it, she was walking down the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floors. The first door opened into a bedroom that was clearly Garrett's, sparse and practical, with a bed that looked slept in and clothes that needed folding. She closed it quickly, feeling like an intruder. The second door was different. When she opened it, sunlight streamed in through tall windows, illuminating a room that was frozen in time. A woman's dressing table stood against one wall, the surface still covered with brushes and combs and small bottles of perfume. A wardrobe stood open, revealing dresses in soft colors that nobody had worn in years. The bed was made with a quilt similar to the one in Alara's room, and on the nightstand was a photograph in a silver frame. Alara picked it up with shaking hands. The woman in the photograph was beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with regular features or fashionable dress. She was laughing at something off camera, her eyes bright with joy, and beside her stood a younger version of Garrett, a man who smiled easily and looked at his wife like she hung the moon. This was Catherine's room, Catherine's space, the shrine Garrett had built to a woman who would never come back. I didn't say you could go in there. Alara spun around. Garrett stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, and she couldn't tell if he was angry or hurt or something else entirely. I'm sorry, the door was open and I was curious, I know. He walked into the room slowly, like he was approaching something dangerous. I opened it this morning, first time in 2 years. Thought maybe it was time to let some air in, let some light touch the dust. Didn't expect you to find it. I'll go. No. He gestured to the photograph still in her hands. You wanted to know about her. Ask. Alara set the photograph down carefully. You don't have to. I know, but maybe I want to. He picked up the photograph, looking at it with an expression that broke Alara's heart. She was 23 in this picture. We'd been married for a year. Frank took it. He was terrible with a camera, but Catherine loved it anyway because she said it captured us being happy instead of posing for happiness. She looks wonderful. She was, smart and funny and fearless. She could outride half the men on this ranch and wasn't afraid to prove it. He set the photograph back down. When she got sick, she fought it like she fought everything else. Head on, no complaints. But some fights you can't win no matter how brave you are. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything. He moved to the window, looking out over the ranch. You want to know the worst part? The last thing she said to me was, don't let the ranch die with me. And I've spent 2 years doing exactly that, letting everything fall apart because I couldn't stand to see it thrive without her. But you're changing that now. Am I? He turned to face her. Or am I just running from one ghost toward another? What do you mean? You show up out of nowhere, work yourself half to death to make this place livable again, save animals I thought were lost. And suddenly, I'm starting to feel things I haven't felt since Catherine died. That scared the hell out of me, Alara, because I don't know if I'm seeing you for who you are or if I'm just trying to fill a hole that can never be filled. The honesty in his voice made Alara's chest tight. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. But that doesn't change how I feel. He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated and lost. You deserve better than being someone's second choice, better than living in a dead woman's shadow. Maybe, Alara said carefully, but maybe I also deserve a chance to decide that for myself. They stood looking at each other across Catherine's room, and Alara could feel the weight of everything unsaid between them. She wanted to cross the space, wanted to touch him, wanted to tell him that she understood grief because she carried her own ghosts. But before she could move, footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Frank's voice called out, Boss, we got riders coming up the road, looks official. The moment shattered. Garrett's expression closed off, becoming the stone mask Alara had grown accustomed to. Coming. He left without another word, and Alara stood alone in Catherine's room, wondering what those riders meant and why her stomach had suddenly filled with dread. She found out soon enough. By the time she made it downstairs, 3 well-dressed men were dismounting in the yard. Their horses were expensive, their clothes were expensive, and the way they looked at the ranch made it clear they thought they were slumming. The man in front was tall and thin, with silver hair and a face like he'd been sucking lemons. He pulled off his riding gloves with precise, deliberate movements and looked at Garrett with barely concealed disdain. Garrett Hale, I presume? That's right. And you are? Vincent Crowley. I believe you were expecting my sister, Margaret Winters. The world tilted sideways. Alara grabbed the porch railing to steady herself, and Vincent's eyes found her immediately. His smile was sharp enough to cut. Ah, he said, and you must be the imposter. The word hung in the air like a curse. Imposter. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet Vincent Crowley's cold gaze without flinching. Behind her, she heard the kitchen door open as the ranch hands filed out to see what was happening. I don't know what you're talking about, Alara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Vincent's smile widened. Don't you? My sister Margaret was contracted to marry Mr. Hale here. She was supposed to arrive 6 weeks ago. Instead, we received a very interesting letter from a friend in Black Ridge, describing a woman who arrived claiming to be the bride but bearing a suspicious resemblance to Margaret's former seamstress colleague. Alara Frost, wasn't it? Garrett turned to look at her, and the betrayal in his eyes was worse than anything Vincent could have said. Alara? I can explain. Can you? Because I'd very much like to hear this explanation. Vincent dismounted fully now, handing his reins to one of his companions. You see, Mr. Hale, my sister is a woman of some means. Our family has extensive holdings in Philadelphia, and when Margaret expressed interest in this frontier adventure, I insisted on drawing up a proper contract. A contract that you signed, if I recall correctly. I signed an agreement to marry Margaret Winters, Garrett said slowly, not to employ her friend under false pretenses. I never claimed to be Margaret. Alara's voice came out sharper than she intended. I told you from the first day that Margaret wasn't coming, that I was her sister, Garrett finished. You said you were her sister. You lied. I said she was like a sister. There's a difference. Is there? Vincent pulled a document from his coat pocket. Because according to Mr. Hale's contract, he agreed to pay for Margaret's passage, provide her with a home, and marry her within 3 months of her arrival. In exchange, Margaret agreed to fulfill the duties of a rancher's wife and bring with her a dowry of $500. He looked at Alara with mock sympathy. I don't suppose you brought $500 with you. You know I didn't. Then you came here under false pretenses, took advantage of Mr. Hale's generosity, and prevented my sister from fulfilling her contractual obligations. I believe that constitutes fraud in any territory. The ranch hands were murmuring now, and Alara could feel their eyes on her back. She'd worked alongside these men for 6 weeks, earned their respect through sweat and stubbornness, and now they were looking at her like she was exactly what Vincent said she was, a fraud, a liar, a woman who'd conned her way onto a ranch that didn't want her. Where's Margaret now? Garrett asked, and his voice was flat and cold. Vincent waved a hand dismissively. Still in Philadelphia, naturally. When she received my letter about your impostor, she was quite distressed. Wanted to come immediately to set things right, but I convinced her to let me handle it first. No sense in dragging her all the way out here if the situation can be resolved without her presence. And how do you propose to resolve it? Simple. This woman leaves on tomorrow's stage. Margaret arrives within the month as originally planned. You honor your contract, she honors hers, and we all forget this unfortunate incident ever occurred. Alara's hands clenched into fists. I'm not leaving. You don't have a choice, Vincent said pleasantly. You're trespassing on private property under fraudulent pretenses. Mr. Hale would be well within his rights to have you arrested. Garrett, Alara turned to him, pleading now. Please, just let me explain. But Garrett wouldn't look at her. He was staring at the document in Vincent's hand, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too bitter to spit out. Is this legal? He asked finally. Perfectly legal. Drawn up by the finest lawyers in Philadelphia. You signed it, Mr. Hale, which means you're bound by its terms. Vincent tucked the document away. Of course, if you'd prefer to break the contract, that's your right. But it would cost you the $500 penalty clause, plus whatever damages my family chooses to pursue for the inconvenience. $500. It might as well have been $5 million. Alara could see the calculation happening behind Garrett's eyes, could see him weighing his options and finding them all weighted against her. The stage leaves at 9 tomorrow morning, Garrett said quietly. Alara felt something crack inside her chest. You're just going to let him do this? After everything? After everything you lied to me. Now Garrett did look at her, and his eyes were hard as granite. You stood in my kitchen and let me believe you were someone you weren't. You worked on this ranch, slept in my house, ate my food, all while knowing you had no right to be here. I had every right. I worked for my place here, earned it with my own hands. I didn't take anything from you that I didn't pay back 10 times over. You took my trust. That's not something you can pay back. The words hit like a physical blow. Alara stepped backward, nearly stumbling on the porch steps. Frank reached out to steady her, but she jerked away from his touch. Fine, she said, her voice shaking. I'll leave. But don't you dare act like you're the victim here, Garrett Hale. Don't act like you were forced into anything. You brought me to this ranch. You gave me work. You let me stay. If you want to throw me out now because some fancy Eastern gentleman shows up with a piece of paper, that's your choice. But own it. Don't hide behind contracts and pretend you don't have a say. She turned and walked back into the house before anyone could see the tears starting to fall. Behind her, she heard Vincent's smooth voice saying something about accommodations in town, heard Garrett's curt response, heard the ranch hands dispersing back to their work. But it all felt distant, muffled, like she was hearing it from underwater. In her room, Alara pulled out her suitcase and started packing. It didn't take long. She still barely owned anything. 2 dresses, both worn nearly to death from weeks of hard work. The spare undergarments. The journal. The photograph of her parents. She was folding the quilt from her bed when she heard footsteps in the hallway. For a moment, her heart leaped, thinking it might be Garrett coming to apologize, to say he'd made a mistake. But when the knock came, it was Frank's voice that called out, "Miss Frost, can I come in?" She opened the door. Frank stood there looking older than she'd ever seen him, his hat in his hands, his expression pained. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Not your fault." "Still sorry. You've been good for this place. Good for the boss, even if he's too stubborn to see it right now." Frank shifted his weight. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're an imposter. I think you're a woman who saw a chance and took it, and there ain't nothing wrong with that." Apparently, the law disagrees. The law's an ass sometimes. He pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch that jingled when he moved it. "The boys and I took up a collection. It ain't much, maybe $20 total, but it should get you somewhere better than wherever you came from." Alara stared at the pouch, her throat tight. "I can't take your money." "Sure you can. We want you to have it. Miguel said to tell you that you gave this ranch its heart back, and that's worth more than $20. Charlie said you're the best cook he's ever had, and he hopes wherever you end up, they appreciate you. Danny and Tom are too stupid to say anything meaningful, but they contributed anyway." "And you?" Frank's weathered face creased into a sad smile. "I say you're tougher than you look, and any place would be lucky to have you. And I say that boss of mine is making the biggest mistake of his life, but he'll figure that out too late like most men do." He pressed the pouch into her hands and left before she could argue. Alara sat on the bed and counted the money, $23.40. Combined with her own 14 cents, it was more than she'd had when she arrived. Enough for a train ticket east, maybe even enough to start over somewhere new. But she didn't want to start over somewhere new. She wanted to stay here, in this cold house she'd spent 6 weeks warming, on this harsh land she'd learned to love, with the man who'd looked at her in Catherine's room like she might be worth the risk of loving again. She wanted to stay, and for the first time in her life, wanting felt worse than losing. Dinner was a quiet affair. Alara cooked one last meal for the ranch hands, putting everything she had into making it special. Roast beef with herbs from the garden she'd brought back to life. Fresh bread that filled the kitchen with warmth. Apple pie made from the preserved fruit in the cellar. The men ate in near silence, shooting glances at each other and at the empty chair where Garrett usually sat. He'd sent word through Miguel that he was eating in town with the Crowley party and wouldn't be back until late. "This is the best meal I've had in my entire life," Charlie said quietly. "Just wanted you to know that, Miss Frost." "Mine too," Miguel agreed. "My mother was a good cook, but you put love into it. We could all taste it." Alara had to turn away to hide the tears threatening to spill. "Thank you, all of you, for giving me a chance when you didn't have to." After they left, she cleaned the kitchen one last time, scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, organized the pantry, left notes about where things were kept and how to work the temperamental stove. She told herself it was for whoever came next, for Margaret, the real bride, the woman who actually belonged here. But really, she was just trying to leave some part of herself behind. She was finishing the dishes when she heard the front door open. Her heart jumped, but when Garrett walked into the kitchen, his face was carefully blank. "Thought you'd be asleep by now," he said. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd leave everything clean." "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She dried her hands on a towel, not looking at him. "The stew on the stove is for breakfast. Just heat it up and add some eggs. There's fresh bread in the box and coffee already ground. The pantry is organized now, and I wrote down the recipes the men like best. They're in the drawer by the Alara, stop." She stopped, her hand still on the towel, her eyes still on the floor. "Look at me," Garrett said softly. She did, and the expression on his face made her chest ache. He looked tired and lost, and like he was fighting some internal battle he wasn't sure how to win. "I don't want you to go," he said. "Then tell Vincent Crowley to leave. Tell him you don't want his sister or his contract or his $500. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You're choosing a piece of paper over a real person. You're choosing someone you've never met over someone who's been here, working beside you, living in your house, caring about your ranch. She threw the towel down, anger finally breaking through. What did I do that was so unforgivable? I came here looking for a home. I worked for my place. I never lied about who I was. I just didn't correct your assumption about how I knew Margaret. Is that really worth throwing me out? You should have told me the truth from the start. Would you have let me stay if I had? If I'd stepped off that stage and said, "Hi, I'm not the bride you paid for, just her friend who's running from a bad situation in Philadelphia. Can I live here anyway?" Would you have said yes? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. That's what I thought, Alara said bitterly. So don't pretend this is about honesty. This is about you being afraid. Afraid of what? Of letting yourself care about someone again. Of taking a risk on something that isn't guaranteed safe. Catherine died and it broke you. And instead of healing, you just built walls and hid behind them. And the moment someone started breaking those walls down, you found the first excuse to push them away again. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Alara's voice rose despite her best efforts. I saved your calf. I brought your garden back to life. I helped birth your mare in the middle of a storm and saved both animals when your experienced ranch hands couldn't do it. I made this house feel like a home again, made you smile again, made you think about a future that didn't involve just going through the motions until you die. And you're throwing me out because I didn't arrive with the right paperwork. I have obligations. You have choices. You're just too scared to make the one that matters. They stared at each other across the kitchen, the air between them crackling with everything unsaid. Alara waited for him to argue, to defend himself, to tell her she was wrong. Instead, he just said, "The stage leaves at 9. I'll drive you to town." Something inside Alara shattered completely. "Don't bother, I'll walk. It's 5 miles. I don't care." She pushed past him, heading for the stairs. I've walked further for less. She made it to her room before the tears came, pressed her face into the pillow Catherine had probably made and cried like she hadn't cried since her mother died. Cried for the home she was losing, for the man who was too broken to fight for her, for the future she'd let herself start to believe in. Somewhere around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway again. They stopped outside her door just like they had the night before, and she held her breath, hoping and dreading in equal measure. This time, there was a knock. "Alara," Garrett's voice was rough. "Can I come in?" She should have said no, should have told him to leave her alone, to let her cry in peace. Instead, she said, "It's your house." The door opened. Garrett stood in the doorway, backlit by the lamp in the hallway, and even through her tears, Alara could see he looked as wrecked as she felt. "I brought you something," he said. He held out a book, old and leather-bound, the cover worn smooth from years of handling. Alara took it carefully, opening to the first page where flowing handwriting spelled out, "Catherine Hale, her journal." "I can't take this." She would have wanted you to have it. Garrett sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, keeping a careful distance between them. "After she died, I locked everything away. Her clothes, her things, her journal. Couldn't stand to look at any of it. But tonight, I went into her room and I read some of her entries, and you know what I found?" Alara shook her head, unable to speak. She was terrified when she came here, absolutely terrified. Left everything she knew to marry a man she'd only exchanged a few letters with. Came to a harsh land where she didn't know anyone and had to learn everything from scratch. He looked at the journal in Alara's hands, but she wrote that fear was just the price of choosing something worth having, that the best things in life required the most courage. She sounds like she was wise. She was. Wiser than me, anyway. Garrett ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not good at this. At talking about feelings or making the right choice when it costs something, it's easier to hide behind contracts and obligations and pretend I don't have a say. But you were right. I do have a say. I've always had a say." "Then what are you saying?" He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw fear and hope and something that might have been love if given half a chance to grow. "I'm saying I don't want you to leave. I'm saying that piece of paper from Vincent Crowley doesn't mean anything compared to the last 6 weeks. I'm saying you saved a dying ranch and a dying man, and the thought of losing you feels worse than anything I've felt since Catherine died." Alara's heart was beating so hard she thought it might break her ribs. But I need time to figure out how to break the contract without losing everything I've built, to deal with Vincent and his threats, to convince Margaret that she doesn't want to come here anyway." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Can you give me that? A little more time. She wanted to say yes, wanted to throw herself into his arms and tell him she'd wait forever if she had to. But Alara had learned the hard way that words were easy and actions were what mattered. The stage leaves at 9, she said quietly. If you haven't figured it out by then, the choice gets made for you. He flinched like she'd hit him, but he nodded. That's fair. Is it? She squeezed his hand once, then let go. I'm not trying to be cruel, Garrett, but I can't keep putting my life on hold waiting for someone else to decide I'm worth choosing. I did that in Philadelphia, and it nearly destroyed me. So either you figure this out, or you don't. Either way, I need to know before I get on that stage. I understand. He stood to leave, but at the door he paused. For what it's worth, you're worth choosing. You're worth fighting for. I'm just not sure I remember how to fight for anything except this ranch. Then you'd better remember fast. After he left, Alara opened Catherine's journal and read by lamplight until her eyes grew heavy. The entries were honest and raw, a woman documenting her fears and her triumphs, her struggles to belong in a harsh new world. And running through every page was a love for the land and for Garrett that made Alara's chest tight with envy. The last entry was dated 3 days before Catherine died. It was short, just a few lines, but they burned themselves into Alara's memory. I am not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid of leaving Garrett alone. He thinks he's strong enough to survive anything, but he survives by not feeling, and that's not living at all. I pray that someday he finds someone who teaches him how to live again, someone brave enough to break down his walls and stubborn enough to stay when he tries to push them away. Alara closed the journal with shaking hands. It felt like Catherine was speaking to her across the grave, giving her permission, or maybe a mission. Either way, it made what she had to do next even harder. She couldn't wait for Garrett to save her. She had to save herself. The night passed in fits of restless sleep. Every time Alara closed her eyes, she saw Garrett's face, heard his voice saying he didn't want her to leave. But wanting wasn't the same as choosing, and she'd learned that lesson too well to forget it now. She woke before dawn to find frost on the windows, the first real cold of the approaching winter. In a few months, the ranch would be buried in snow. The work would shift to survival mode, and whoever was here would need to be tough enough to last through the frozen months. Alara had survived worse than winter, but she couldn't survive another heartbreak. She dressed carefully in her best dress, which still looked worn and tired but was clean, at least. Packed the last of her things. Left Catherine's journal on the dresser where Garrett would find it. She'd read enough to know the journal's real home was with him, not with her. Downstairs, she found the ranch hands already gathered in the kitchen. They'd made breakfast themselves, lumpy oatmeal and burnt coffee, and they looked up when she entered with expressions of misery. We're not very good at this, Danny admitted, gesturing to the sad meal. You'll learn. Alara forced a smile. Or you'll hire someone better than me. There is no one better than you, Miguel said firmly. The boss is a fool if he lets you go. The boss is in a difficult position. The boss is being a coward, Frank corrected. Begging your pardon, Miss Frost, but it's true. He's had all night to figure this out, and instead he's been holed up in the barn like hiding will make the problem go away. So Garrett had spent the night in the barn. Alara didn't know if that made her feel better or worse. Maybe it's for the best, she said, trying to convince herself as much as them. Maybe Margaret will be perfect for him. Maybe she'll love the ranch and bring it prosperity and give him the family he wants. Margaret can go to hell, Charlie said with uncharacteristic venom. Sorry for the language, but it's true. We don't want some stranger coming here thinking she's better than us just because her brother's got money. We want you. The simple honesty of it made Alara's eyes burn. Thank you, all of you. You've made me feel more at home in 6 weeks than I felt in 20 years in Philadelphia. She ate breakfast with them one last time, choking down the burnt coffee and the lumpy oatmeal and pretending everything was fine. When 8 o'clock came, she stood and collected her suitcase. I can drive you to town, Frank offered. No need, it's a nice morning for a walk. 5 miles with a suitcase ain't a nice anything. I'll manage. She looked at each of them in turn. Take care of the garden. Don't let it die again. And take care of Garrett. He acts tough, but he's more fragile than he wants anyone to know. We will, Miguel promised. Vaya con Dios, Miss Frost. She stepped out into the cold morning air and started walking. Behind her, she heard the kitchen door open and close, heard Frank's voice calling something she couldn't quite make out. But she didn't turn around. If she turned around, she might not be able to leave. The walk to town was longer than she remembered. Her suitcase grew heavier with every step, and the cold bit through her dress despite the exercise of walking. The sun rose slowly, painting the mountains gold and purple, and Alara tried to memorize it all, the vast sky, the endless prairie, the way the light made everything look possible. She was halfway to town when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Her heart leaped, but when she turned, it wasn't Garrett riding toward her. It was Vincent Crowley, looking perfectly composed despite the early hour. "Miss Frost," he said pleasantly, reining his horse to a walk beside her. "Heading to the stage?" "Obviously." "Good. I was concerned you might try to stay 'cause some sort of scene. I'm pleased to see you're being sensible about this." He smiled his sharp smile. "You know, I almost admire you. Coming all this way, working as hard as you did, nearly convincing a wealthy rancher to forget his obligations. It was a good con." "It wasn't a con." "Wasn't it? You took advantage of a lonely man's grief, used his dead wife's memory to manipulate your way into his home. That's con artistry at its finest." Alara stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "I worked for every single thing I received on that ranch. I didn't manipulate anyone. I cleaned and cooked and saved animals and made a dead house come back to life. That's not a con. That's called earning your place. By lying about who you were." "I never lied about who I was. I'm Alara Frost, a seamstress from Philadelphia who needed a fresh start. That's the truth. The only lie was letting Garrett assume I had some claim to be here, and I corrected that the first day." Vincent's smile faded. "The problem, Miss Frost, is that you don't belong here. You're not educated enough, not refined enough, not wealthy enough. My sister is all those things. She'll make Garrett Hale a proper wife, give him proper children, and turn that rustic ranch into something respectable." "Respectable?" Alara laughed bitterly. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not the contract or the money. You can't stand the idea of your sister being replaced by someone you consider beneath her." "My sister is beneath no one." "Then why isn't she here fighting for him herself? Why send you to do her dirty work?" Alara shifted her suitcase to her other hand. "I'll tell you why. Because Margaret doesn't want to come here any more than she wanted to come 6 weeks ago. She's using you to save face, and you're using Garrett's contract to protect your family's pride. But none of that has anything to do with what's actually best for Garrett or for that ranch." Vincent's expression turned cold. "You're awfully bold for someone who's about to be thrown out." "I'm bold because I have nothing left to lose." Alara started walking again. "Do me a favor, Mr. Crowley. When Margaret arrives and realizes she hates everything about frontier life, when she makes Garrett miserable with her complaints and her longing for Philadelphia society, remember this conversation. Remember that you had a choice, and you chose wrong." She left him sitting on his horse in the middle of the road and didn't look back. Town was just coming awake when she arrived. The stage was already waiting in front of the general store, the driver checking the horses and loading luggage. Alara approached slowly, each step feeling like a betrayal of the hope she'd carried all the way from Philadelphia. "You got a ticket, miss?" the driver asked. "Not yet." "How much to go east?" "Depends on how far east. Next stop is Fort Benton, $15. From there you can catch a train to anywhere." $15. She had 23 and change, enough to get her started somewhere new, somewhere she could disappear into and try to forget a ranch and a man and 6 weeks of almost belonging. "I'll take it," she heard herself say. The driver took her money and loaded her suitcase. Other passengers were starting to gather. A young couple with a baby, an older man who looked like a traveling salesman, a woman in a traveling dress even more worn than Alara's. Normal people living normal lives, none of them knowing they were witnessing the end of Alara's one real chance at happiness. 9 o'clock came. The driver climbed onto his bench and gathered the reins. "All aboard! Stage leaves in 2 minutes!" Alara put her foot on the step, her hand on the doorframe. This was it. The moment where she chose to save herself instead of waiting to be saved. "Wait!" The voice came from down the street, and Alara's heart stopped. But when she turned, it wasn't Garrett running toward the stage. It was Margaret Winters. Margaret looked exactly like Alara remembered, petite and pretty, with golden hair and china blue eyes that had always made men stupid. She was dressed in traveling clothes that probably cost more than everything Alara owned, and she was running down the street with her skirts hiked up in a way that would have scandalized her back in Philadelphia. "Alara, wait, please!" The stage driver looked between them with confusion. You two know each other? She's my friend, Margaret gasped, reaching the stage and bending over to catch her breath. Or she was. Elara, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. Your brother made everything very clear yesterday. My brother is an idiot who thinks he knows what's best for me. Margaret straightened up, and Elara could see tears tracking down her face. I didn't know he was coming here. I didn't know about any of this until I got his telegram 3 days ago saying he'd handled the situation. I took the first train west because I had to stop him before he ruined everything. He already ruined everything. I'm leaving. No, you're not. Margaret grabbed Elara's arm. Not until you hear me out, please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Elara looked at the stage driver, who shrugged. We can wait 5 minutes, but after that we're leaving with or without you, miss. Margaret pulled Elara away from the stage toward the general store's porch. They sat on the bench there, and for a moment neither spoke. Elara could see Vincent watching from across the street, his face dark with disapproval. I never wanted to come here, Margaret said finally. When that advertisement appeared in the paper and my friend showed it to me as a joke, I laughed. The idea of marrying some rough rancher and moving to Montana seemed absurd. But then you and I talked about it, remember? About how maybe the frontier was where women like us could actually have value instead of just being decorations in some rich man's house. I remember. You were so excited about the possibility, so ready to believe you could build something real out west. And I was terrified, but I responded to the advertisement anyway because your excitement was contagious. Margaret twisted her hands together. When the money came for the train ticket, I panicked. Couldn't sleep for 3 nights. Kept imagining myself dying in childbirth in the middle of nowhere, or getting eaten by bears, or just slowly withering away from loneliness. So you ran. So I ran. And you took my place because that's what you do. You see an opportunity, and you grab it because you've never had the luxury of being afraid. Margaret looked at her with reddened eyes. I thought I was being smart. Thought I was saving myself. But then Vincent got a letter from his friend here saying some imposter had shown up claiming to be me, and he decided to protect the family honor by coming out here to fix things. By throwing me out and forcing you to come. Exactly. And I let him because I was too much of a coward to tell him the truth, that I gave you my ticket, that I wanted you to have the chance I was too scared to take, that everything that happened was my fault, not yours. Elara stared at her. You gave me the ticket? Of course I did. Did you really think I just left it lying around for you to steal? Margaret laughed bitterly. I knew if I told you to take it, you'd refuse. You were always too proud to accept charity. So I pretended I'd forgotten it, pretended I didn't notice when you picked it up, pretended I didn't know you'd take my place, because I wanted you to have what I was too weak to claim. That doesn't change anything. Garrett still has a contract with you, not me. Vincent still wants me gone. Vincent can go straight to hell. Margaret's voice turned hard. I'm not marrying Garrett Hale. I'm not coming to this territory. And I'm telling my brother that right now in front of the whole town if I have to. She stood up and marched across the street to where Vincent was standing. Elara followed, drawn by a terrible fascination, and soon a crowd was gathering. Small towns couldn't resist drama, and this was better than anything they'd had in months. Vincent, Margaret said loud enough for everyone to hear. I need you to understand something. I am not now, nor will I ever be, interested in marrying Mr. Hale or living in Montana territory. Vincent's face went purple. Margaret, this is neither the time nor the place. This is exactly the time and place. You've spent the last 2 days humiliating my friend and threatening a man you've never met, all in the name of protecting some contract I never wanted in the first place. You signed it, under pressure from you. You were the one who thought marrying me off to a wealthy rancher would improve our family's standing. You were the one who pushed and pushed until I agreed just to make you stop. But I never wanted this, Vincent. I never wanted any of it. The crowd was whispering now, and Vincent's composure was cracking. You're being hysterical. I'm being honest, there's a difference. Margaret turned to address the growing audience. My name is Margaret Winters, and I was supposed to marry Garrett Hale. But I gave my ticket to my friend Elara Frost because she deserved the chance more than I did. Everything that's happened since then is my fault, not hers. So if anyone has a problem with her being here, they can take it up with me. This is absurd, Vincent hissed. You're making a spectacle. Good. Let them watch. Margaret's voice was rising now, months or maybe years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. I'm tired of doing what you tell me to do. Tired of being the obedient little sister who goes along with your plans because it's easier than fighting. Alara had the courage to come out here and build something from nothing. The least I can do is have the courage to tell the truth. Vincent grabbed her arm hard enough to make her wince. We're going back to the hotel right now, and you are going to compose yourself, and tomorrow we are going to… Let go of her! The voice cut through the crowd like a knife, and everyone turned. Garrett stood at the edge of the gathering, covered in dust and looking like he'd ridden hard and fast. His eyes were locked on Vincent's hand around Margaret's arm, and the expression on his face made several people step back. I said let go of her. Vincent released Margaret, but his chin lifted defiantly. This doesn't concern you, Hale. It concerns me plenty when a man puts his hands on a woman in my town. Garrett moved forward until he was standing between Vincent and Margaret. Miss Winters, are you all right? Margaret nodded, rubbing her arm where Vincent had grabbed her. I'm fine, thank you. Good. Garrett turned his attention to Vincent. Now, about this contract. I believe Miss Winters has made her position clear. She doesn't want to marry me, and frankly, I don't want to marry her either. So I'm proposing we dissolve the agreement. You can't just dissolve it. There are penalties. $500, I know. I read the contract. Garrett pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. This is a bank draft for the full amount. Take it and go back to Philadelphia and leave both Miss Winters and Miss Frost alone. Vincent stared at the draft like it was a snake. Where did you get $500? That's my business. Do you want the money or not? This isn't about money. This is about honor, about keeping your word. My word was given to your sister, and she's releasing me from it. The money covers any damages, so unless you've got some other objection, I'd suggest you take the draft and get out of my territory. The crowd was openly grinning now. Vincent looked around at the hostile faces and seemed to realize he'd lost. He snatched the draft from Garrett's hand with poor grace. This isn't over, he said. Yeah, it is. Garrett's voice was flat and final. And if I see you around here again, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. The kind that doesn't involve lawyers. Vincent turned on his heel and stalked toward the hotel. Margaret watched him go with an expression that mixed relief and sadness. I'm sorry, she said to Garrett, for all of this, for my brother's behavior, for the contract, for not being brave enough to tell you the truth from the start. Nothing to apologize for, you didn't owe me anything. Garrett looked past her to where Alara was standing frozen by the stage. But I owe your friend an apology. Several apologies, actually. He crossed to Alara, and the crowd pressed closer, not wanting to miss a word. Alara wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but here with dozens of people watching her most private moment play out like theater. I was wrong, Garrett said simply. Wrong to doubt you, wrong to let Vincent push me around, wrong to hide in the barn instead of fighting for what mattered. You told me I was being a coward, and you were right. Garrett, let me finish, please. He took a breath. When Catherine died, I decided it was safer to feel nothing than to risk getting hurt again. Built walls so high nobody could reach me, and I told myself it was strength. But you showed me it wasn't strength. It was just fear with a different name. The crowd was dead silent now. Alara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Margaret's encouraging presence beside her, could see Frank and Miguel and the other ranch hands standing at the edge of the crowd with hopeful expressions. I spent all night trying to figure out how to get that $500, Garrett continued. Went to the bank, but they wouldn't give me a loan that size without collateral I couldn't spare. Tried to sell some cattle, but couldn't find a buyer willing to pay cash that fast. Was about ready to give up when Frank came to the barn and told me I was being an idiot. Frank's a wise man, Alara said, her voice shaking. He is. He said Catherine would be ashamed of me for choosing a contract over a real person. Said she'd probably come back from the grave just to kick my ass for being such a fool. Garrett smiled slightly. Then he and the other boys offered to loan me the money. Turns out they've been saving their wages for years, and together they had almost $300. The rest came from selling my prize bull to the Hendersons. Alara's breath caught. You sold Thunder? He was just a bull. Garrett stopped, seemed to gather courage. You're the woman who brought my ranch back to life, who saved my animals and healed my heart and made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just surviving. I was a damn fool to let Vincent Crowley make me forget that even for a minute. So what are you saying? I'm saying don't get on that stage. I'm saying stay at the ranch, not as hired help or as some replacement for Catherine, but as yourself. As Alara, the woman who's too stubborn to quit and too brave to back down and too good for me, but maybe willing to give me a chance anyway. The crowd was holding its collective breath. Alara looked at Garrett, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd finally learned how to fight for something other than land and cattle. Saw a man who was terrified and hopeful and offering her everything she'd wanted without any guarantees it would work. She should have been happy, should have been relieved, but all she could think about was Vincent's cruel words, the town's whispers, the way everyone had looked at her like she was a con artist trying to steal what wasn't hers. "You humiliated me," she said quietly. "Yesterday, in front of everyone, you chose a piece of paper over me, chose Vincent's threats over everything we'd built together, and now you want me to just forget that happened. No, I want you to forgive it." Garrett's voice was raw. "I want you to understand that I was scared and stupid and wrong, and I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry, Alara, but I'm here now, fighting for you like I should have fought yesterday. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for something, but is it enough?" She looked around at the crowd, at the town that had mocked her as the wrong bride, at the people who'd whispered about her behind her back. "How do I know you won't get scared again? How do I know that the next time something hard happens, you won't choose the easy way out and leave me standing alone? You don't know. I can't promise I'll be perfect or that I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise I'll fight for you, for us, for the life we could build together. That's all I've got to offer, my word and my willingness to try." Alara wanted to say yes, wanted to throw herself into his arms and let the crowd cheer and ride back to the ranch like a fairy tale ending. But fairy tales were for people who hadn't learned that happy endings required more than just wanting them. "I need time," she heard herself say. Garrett's face fell. "How much time?" "I don't know. I need to think. Need to figure out if I can trust you again, if I can trust myself, if staying here is brave or just stupid." She looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm not getting on the stage today, but I'm not making any promises either." "That's fair." Garrett stepped back, giving her space. "Where will you stay?" "I'll figure something out." "Stay with me," Margaret said immediately. "Vincent rented rooms at the hotel, but I'm not staying with him. We can share a room, talk like we used to, figure things out together." It was tempting, too tempting. But Alara had learned not to lean on others when she could stand on her own. "Thank you, but no. I need to be alone for a bit." "The boarding house has rooms," the woman who ran the general store offered from the crowd. "Clean and cheap. You can stay as long as you need." Alara nodded her thanks. The crowd was starting to disperse now that the drama was over, people heading back to their lives and their gossip. Garrett stood in the middle of the street looking lost, and part of Alara wanted to go to him, wanted to ease the hurt in his eyes. But the bigger part of her, the part that had survived Philadelphia and the journey west and 6 weeks of being the wrong bride, knew she needed to choose herself first this time. She collected her suitcase from the stage and walked toward the boarding house. Behind her, she heard Margaret talking to Garrett in low tones, heard Frank's gruff voice saying something about giving her time. But she didn't turn around. If she turned around, she might change her mind. The boarding house was small but clean, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions and expected no explanations. Alara paid for a week in advance with the money the ranch hands had given her and climbed the stairs to a tiny room with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the main street. She sat on the bed and tried to figure out what she was feeling. Anger at Garrett for his weakness, anger at herself for caring so much, relief that she wasn't leaving, terror that she'd made the wrong choice by staying, love and hurt and hope and despair all tangled together until she couldn't separate one from the other. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Margaret standing there with a small basket. "Mrs. Chen said you hadn't eaten. I brought some bread and cheese from the hotel kitchen." "Thank you." Margaret came in without being invited and sat on the bed beside Alara. For a moment, they just sat there, two women who'd known each other in a different life and were now strangers trying to reconnect. "I'm sorry," Margaret said finally, "for everything. For being a coward, for letting Vincent come here, for not standing up for you sooner. You stood up for me today. That counts." "Does it? Because I feel like I destroyed your life and then showed up at the last minute to play hero." Margaret picked at the bread. You should hate me. I should, but I don't. Alara took a piece of cheese. You gave me a chance I never would have had otherwise. Yeah, it got messy, but that's not your fault. You didn't know Vincent would show up with his contracts and his threats. I should have known. He's always been controlling, always thought he knew what was best for me. I should have stood up to him years ago. Well, you stood up to him today. That's a start. They ate in silence for a while, and gradually Alara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Having Margaret here felt like having a piece of her old life back, but a better piece. The part that had been friendship and support instead of fear and desperation. Garrett loves you, Margaret said eventually. I could see it in his face when he was talking to you. He's terrified, and he doesn't know how to handle it, but he loves you. Love isn't enough. I learned that in Philadelphia. What happened there? You never told me the whole story. Alara hesitated, then the words started spilling out. About the dress shop owner's son who'd pursued her for months with promises of marriage. About how she'd believed him because she'd wanted so desperately to believe someone could love her. About the night he'd gotten drunk and violent when she'd refused to share his bed before the wedding. About the bruises and the broken trust and the way he'd told everyone she'd seduced him when she threatened to report him to the police. I left with nothing, Alara said. My reputation destroyed, no job, no prospects. That's when I saw your ticket and thought maybe this was my chance to start over. To be someone new somewhere, nobody knew my shame. Margaret's eyes were filled with tears. I didn't know. If I'd known, you couldn't have done anything. Rich men like him always win. Women like me always lose. Alara wiped her own eyes angrily. That's why I can't just forgive Garrett and move on. Because I've heard pretty words before. I've seen men choose themselves over me before, and I won't survive it again if I let myself hope and he breaks my heart. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Figure out if I can make a life here on my own, maybe. Find work in town, save money, build something that's mine and can't be taken away by a man's fear or a piece of paper. That sounds lonely. Lonely is safe. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Catherine's journal, did you read it? Some of it. Garrett gave it to me the night before Vincent showed up. What did she say? Alara thought about the last entry, about Catherine's prayer that Garrett would find someone brave enough to break down his walls. She said love was worth the risk. Was she right? I don't know. She died, Margaret. She took the risk and loved him completely. And then she died and left him broken. How is that worth it? Because she lived first. Really lived, not just survived. She chose love over safety, chose the frontier over comfort, chose a hard, beautiful life over an easy, empty one. Margaret took Alara's hand. You're the bravest person I know. You survived things that would have destroyed me. You built a home out of nothing in 6 weeks. Don't let fear steal that from you now. I'm not afraid. Yes, you are. And that's okay. Brave people aren't the ones who feel no fear. They're the ones who feel it and choose to move forward anyway. Margaret left shortly after, heading back to confront Vincent about their return to Philadelphia. Alara sat alone in the growing darkness, thinking about bravery and fear and whether there was really a difference between the two. Around 8 o'clock, there was another knock. This time, it was Frank. Miss Frost, he said, hat in hand, got a message from the boss. He's asking if you'll meet him tomorrow morning at the ranch. Says he wants to show you something. What kind of something? Didn't say. Just asked me to ask you. No pressure, no expectations. Just a request. Alara wanted to say no. Wanted to keep her distance, keep herself safe. But curiosity was stronger than caution, and maybe Margaret was right about bravery. What time? 8 o'clock. I can drive you out if you want. I'll walk. Frank smiled. Somehow I figured you'd say that. Good night, Miss Frost. After he left, Alara lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd go back to the ranch one more time. She'd see what Garrett wanted to show her, and then she'd make her choice. Safety or risk, loneliness or love, the wrong bride or the right woman in the wrong place at the right time. She fell asleep still undecided and dreamed of gardens growing wild and houses filled with warmth, and a man with gray eyes learning how to smile again. The walk to the ranch the next morning was cold and clear. Frost glittered on the grass, and Alara's breath made clouds in the air. She'd dressed in her worst dress, the one ruined from birthing the foal, because she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just trying to understand. The ranch looked different in the morning light. Quieter, somehow. More peaceful. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney. Normal morning sounds, men working, animals living, a ranch going about its business. Garrett was waiting on the porch. He stood when he saw her coming, and Alara could see he'd tried to clean up. Shaved, changed his shirt, combed his hair. It made her smile despite herself. "You came," he said. "I said I would. I know, but I wasn't sure you meant it." He gestured to the door. "Come inside, there's coffee." The house felt different too. It took Alara a moment to figure out why, and then she realized the door to the west wing was open, not just unlocked, but standing wide open like an invitation. "I started packing up Catherine's things," Garrett said, following her gaze. "Not to forget her, but to let her rest. Frank's been helping. We've cleared out most of the room, donated the dresses to the church, put away the brushes and the bottles, kept the important things, her journal, some photographs, the quilt she made, but let go of the shrine. That must have been hard." It was. But it was also right. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her upstairs, past her old room, past Catherine's empty room, to a door at the end of the hallway that Alara had never opened. Inside was a small study with a desk, a chair, and windows that looked out over the garden. On the desk was a single piece of paper. Alara picked it up and read, "Deed to Black Ridge Ranch, 2,000 acres, registered to Garrett Thomas Hale," and the second name was blank, waiting to be filled in. "I don't understand," she said. "The ranch is mine, but it's lonely being the only owner. Lonely making all the decisions, bearing all the responsibility, having nobody to share the victories or the losses with." Garrett moved to stand beside her. "Catherine's name was on the deed when she was alive. When she died, I took it off because it hurt too much to see it. But last night I went to the land office and had them draw up a new deed, one with space for a partner. Garrett, I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. That's too much pressure, too much expectation. But I am asking you to consider being my partner. Equal ownership, equal say in how the ranch runs, equal share in the profits. Your name beside mine on the deed is proof that you're not hired help or a replacement or someone who's just passing through. You're someone who belongs here because you've earned it." Alara stared at the paper, her hands shaking. "This is crazy." "Probably, but so is everything else about us." He took the paper from her gently and set it back on the desk. "I know you're scared. I know I hurt you and broke your trust, but I'm trying to show you that I'm serious about changing, about choosing you, about building something together instead of just surviving alone. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail and end up hating each other? Then at least we tried. At least we were brave enough to risk it." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Catherine wrote in her journal that fear was just the price of choosing something worth having. I think she was right. And I think you're worth every bit of fear I'm feeling right now. Alara looked up at him, saw the hope and terror in his eyes. Saw a man who was finally willing to fight for something other than land. And she thought about Philadelphia, about running, about all the times she'd chosen safety over risk and ended up empty anyway. "I need conditions," she said. "Name them." 1. If I do this, my name goes on that deed today. Not next week, not next month. Today. I'm not waiting around hoping you'll change your mind. Agreed. 2. I'm not moving back to the ranch until we figure out what we are to each other. I'll work there during the day, but I'll stay in town at night. I need space to think, to breathe, to decide if this is really what I want. That's fair. 3. If this doesn't work, if we decide we're better as partners than as anything else, you promise me it won't affect my ownership of the ranch. My name stays on that deed no matter what happens between us personally. Garrett hesitated and Alara held her breath. This was the real test, whether he was offering her security or just another pretty lie. Agreed, he said finally. Your name on the deed means you own half this ranch no matter what. That's not conditional on you loving me or marrying me or anything else. That's just yours. Alara felt something loosen in her chest. Then I'll do it. I'll be your partner. The smile that broke across Garrett's face was worth every moment of fear and doubt. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since Vincent had shown up, Alara let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would work out. They went to the land office that afternoon, signed the papers, filed the deed, made it official. Alara Frost, seamstress from Philadelphia, now owned half of a 2,000-acre ranch in Montana Territory. It felt surreal and terrifying and absolutely right. The town buzzed with gossip, the wrong bride who'd become a ranch owner, the wealthy rancher who'd given away half his land to a woman he wasn't even courting properly. But Alara didn't care. She had her name on a legal document that said she belonged somewhere, and that was more than she'd ever dared dream of back in Philadelphia. That evening, she cooked dinner at the ranch for Garrett and the hands. But when night fell, she walked back to town in her little room at the boarding house. Garrett walked with her, not saying much, just keeping her company in the darkness. At the boarding house door, he stopped. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For giving me another chance, for being brave when I was being a coward, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on myself." Alara stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a lot to figure out." "I know, but we'll figure it out together." She watched him walk back toward where he'd left his horse, a dark figure disappearing into the night. Then she climbed the stairs to her room and sat by the window, looking out at the stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear Montana sky. She'd come west as the wrong bride, an imposter trying to steal a life that didn't belong to her. But somehow, through work and stubbornness and refusing to break when breaking would have been easier, she'd become something else entirely. She'd become a woman who owned land and made her own choices and wasn't afraid to demand what she deserved. It wasn't the fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. The arrangement lasted 3 weeks before it started to crack. Alara would arrive at the ranch each morning at dawn, work alongside Garrett and the hands until sunset, then walk back to town in her lonely room at the boarding house. It was practical, safe, everything she'd demanded, and it was slowly driving both of them crazy. "This is ridiculous," Garrett said one evening as he saddled his horse to ride back with her. It had become routine, him escorting her to town, making sure she was safe, then riding back alone in the dark. "You own half this ranch. You should be sleeping here." "We had an agreement." "I know, but the agreement is stupid." Alara couldn't help but smile. "You're the one who agreed to it." "Because I was desperate and would have agreed to anything." He cinched the saddle tight, not looking at her. "But watching you leave every night feels wrong, like I'm failing some test I don't know how to pass." "You're not failing anything. I just need time." "How much time?" "Because I've got to tell you, Alara, this halfway thing is harder than I thought it would be. Working beside you all day, learning to depend on you, starting to plan a future with you, and then watching you walk away every night like I'm someone you can't quite trust yet." The hurt in his voice made her chest tight. "It's not that I don't trust you, isn't it?" He finally looked at her and his eyes were raw. "I hurt you, I know that. I made the wrong choice when it mattered, and you're protecting yourself from me doing it again. I understand that. But I don't know what else I can do to prove I've changed." "I don't know either," Alara admitted. "Maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe I'm punishing you for mistakes you've already apologized for. But every time I think about moving back here permanently, I remember how it felt to stand in that yard and have you choose a contract over me. I remember thinking I'd found a home, only to discover it could be taken away that easily." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father used to hit my mother. Not often, not enough that anyone outside the family noticed, but enough that we all lived in fear of his moods. When I was 16, I told myself I'd never be like him. I'd never hurt someone I loved, never make them afraid, never give them reason to doubt me." Alara had never heard him talk about his parents before. "What happened to them?" "Died in a fire when I was 18. I inherited nothing but debts and a reputation as the son of a mean drunk. Built this ranch from scratch to prove I was different, to prove I could be better than where I came from." He ran a hand through his hair. "But I hurt you anyway. Not with my fists, but with my cowardice. And I don't know how to make that right." "You can't make it right. You can only do better going forward." "Then tell me how. Tell me what you need, because this limbo is killing me." Before Alara could answer, Miguel came running from the barn, his face urgent. "Boss, it's Hope. Something's wrong with the foal." They ran. In the barn, Hope was on her side again, breathing hard, her eyes rolling. The mare stood over her, nickering anxiously, and Alara's heart dropped. The foal had been fine that morning, running and playing in the pasture like foals do. "What happened?" Garrett demanded, kneeling beside Hope. "Don't know. Found her like this 10 minutes ago. Tried to get her up, but her legs won't hold her." Miguel's voice was tight with worry. "Looks like colic, maybe, or something she ate." Alara knelt on Hope's other side, running her hands over the foal's belly. It was distended, tight, and Hope whimpered when she pressed gently. "It's colic, bad colic. We need to get her up and moving or she'll die." "She can't stand," Garrett said. "Then we'll help her stand." For the next 4 hours, they worked. Got Hope on her feet through sheer stubbornness and held her up when her legs gave out. Walked her around the barn in slow circles, fighting to keep her moving even when she tried to lie down. Miguel prepared a mixture of oil and water to help clear the blockage while Frank kept the mare calm, and Garrett and Alara supported the foal's weight between them. It was brutal, exhausting work. Hope fought them, tried to collapse, cried out in pain that made Alara want to cry herself. But they didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This foal that Alara had helped birth, that she'd named, that represented everything fragile and hopeful about new beginnings, she wasn't going to let it die. Around midnight, Hope finally passed the blockage. The relief was immediate. Her breathing eased, her eyes cleared, and within minutes she was standing on her own, wobbling but alive. "We did it," Miguel said, laughing with exhaustion and relief. "Santa Maria, we actually did it." Garrett looked at Alara across Hope's back, and the expression on his face made her heart skip. "You saved her again." "We saved her. All of us." "No." He moved around the foal to stand beside her. "You're the one who knew what to do. You're the one who wouldn't give up even when it looked hopeless. You're the one who keeps saving things that are dying, keeps bringing life to places that have forgotten how to live." He was standing so close now that Alara could feel the heat from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could count the rapid beats of his pulse in his throat. "I'm tired of walking away from you every night," she whispered. "I'm tired of protecting myself from something that might never happen. I'm tired of being afraid." "Then stop." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Stop being afraid. Stop punishing us both for my mistakes. Just stay." "What if you hurt me again?" "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." "But I won't, Alara. I swear to you, I won't. You're not something I'm settling for or making do with. You're the best thing that's happened to me since Catherine died, and I'm not stupid enough to risk losing you twice." Alara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand on her face, the solid presence of him beside her. She was so tired of being strong, of standing alone, of choosing safety over happiness. And maybe that was what Catherine's journal had been trying to tell her, that love required risk, that the best things in life came with no guarantees, that sometimes you just had to jump and trust you'd land somewhere soft. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll stay. No more walking back to town every night. No more keeping you at arm's length. I'll stay and we'll figure this out together." The kiss he gave her was gentle and desperate and full of promise. Miguel and Frank quietly left the barn, giving them privacy, and for a long moment Alara just let herself be held by a man who'd finally learned how to fight for what he wanted. When they finally pulled apart, Garrett was smiling, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Alara Frost. I love you too, even though you're stubborn and closed off and you sold your prize bull for me. Best investment I ever made." They stayed in the barn with Hope until they were sure she was stable, then walked hand in hand back to the house. Alara's room, her real room, not the temporary one in town, was exactly as she'd left it. The quilt still on the bed, her few possessions still in the dresser, like the house had been waiting for her to come home. That night, she slept in Garrett's room for the first time. Not because she had to, not because anyone expected it, but because she wanted to. Because she'd finally learned the difference between settling and choosing, between giving up and giving in. The next morning, she woke to find Garrett already up and gone. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, following the smell of coffee to the kitchen where she found him standing at the stove, burning something that might have been eggs. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making you breakfast, or trying to. Turns out I'm terrible at this." He looked at the pan with disgust. "How do you make eggs that aren't rubber?" Alara laughed and took the pan from him. "Move over. I'll teach you." They cooked together, her hands guiding his, and when the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, they found Alara back where she belonged and Garrett looking happier than any of them had seen him in years. "About time," Frank said with satisfaction. "Thought we were going to have to lock you two in a room together until you figured it out." "We figured it out," Garrett said. "Clearly." Miguel grinned at them. "Does this mean we get good food again?" "Because I love you, boss, but your cooking is criminal." The table erupted in laughter and Alara felt something settle into place inside her chest. This was home, these men, this kitchen, this ranch. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers in a way nothing had ever been hers before. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Alara's life. She and Garrett worked the ranch together, making decisions as partners, arguing over cattle sales and fence repairs and whether to expand the herd. They were good at different things. Garrett understood the business side, the contracts and negotiations, while Alara had a gift for the animals and the land itself. Together, they made the ranch thrive in ways it hadn't since Catherine's death. The garden flourished under Alara's care. She planted winter vegetables, started herbs in the kitchen window, planned expansions for spring. The house slowly came back to life. Curtains on the windows, books on the shelves, small touches that made it feel warm instead of cold. And at night, they lay together in the dark and talked about everything. About their pasts, their fears, their dreams for the future. Garrett told her about Catherine, about their life together, about the guilt he'd carried for not saving her. Alara told him about Philadelphia, about the men who'd hurt her, about the terror of arriving in Black Ridge with nothing but lies and hope. "You're the bravest person I know," Garrett said one night. "I'm not brave, I'm just stubborn." Catherine used to say the same thing, but you're both wrong. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about being terrified and doing the hard thing anyway. He kissed her forehead. "You did the hardest thing. You gave someone a second chance when they didn't deserve it. That takes more courage than anything. You deserved it. You just didn't know it yet." "I'm starting to figure that out." 3 months after Alara moved back to the ranch permanently, Vincent Crowley returned. He rode up to the ranch on a cold December morning with the same companions as before. But this time there was no confidence in his bearing. He looked tired and angry and defeated. "Mr. Hale," he said without dismounting, "I've come to discuss the contract." "There is no contract. I paid the penalty. We're done." "The penalty was for breaking the agreement. But there's the matter of damages to my family's reputation. The scandal of my sister being replaced by a seamstress, the gossip that's followed us back to Philadelphia, is none of my concern." Garrett's voice was flat. "Your sister made her choice. I made mine. If you've got a problem with gossip, take it up with the people doing the gossiping." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I could sue you for defamation, for breach of contract, for—" "You could try, but you'd lose, and you'd spend a fortune on lawyers doing it." Alara stepped up beside Garrett, and Vincent's eyes narrowed when he saw her. "You came all the way back here hoping to intimidate us into giving you more money, but it's not going to work. You have no right to speak to me." "I have every right. I own half this ranch. My name is on the deed right beside Garrett's, which means any lawsuit you bring against him, you bring against me too, and I've got nothing to lose and a lot of anger about how you treated me. So go ahead. Sue us. See what happens." Vincent stared at her, and Alara could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He'd expected to find a weak target, someone he could bully into paying him off. Instead, he'd found a united front. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is." Garrett moved forward until he was standing right beside Vincent's horse. "You're going to ride out of here and never come back. You're going to leave Alara alone, leave me alone, and leave your sister alone to make her own choices. And if I hear you've been spreading lies about any of us, I'll make sure every rancher in the territory knows what kind of man you are. We take care of our own out here, and Alara is one of us now." The threat hung in the air. Vincent looked around at the ranch hands who'd gathered, at Frank standing with his hand on his rifle, at Miguel and Charlie, and the others all watching with hard eyes. He was outnumbered and outmatched, and he knew it. "You'll regret this," he said to Alara. "No, I won't." "But you might. Because Margaret is probably happier without your interference. Maybe you should try letting her live her own life instead of controlling her for once." Vincent left without another word, and Alara watched him go with a sense of finality. That chapter of her life was closed. the wrong bride, the imposter, the woman who'd stolen someone else's place, that was over. She was just Alara now, ranch owner and partner and woman who'd built something real from nothing. "You handled that well," Garrett said. "I've had practice dealing with bullies." "Still, you didn't back down, didn't let him intimidate you. I'm proud of you." The words warmed her from the inside out. "Thank you." That night, Garrett proposed. They were in the barn checking on the animals before bed, and he just stopped in the middle of the walkway and said, "Marry me." Alara turned, sure she'd heard wrong. "What?" "Marry me. I know we've only been together a few months, and I know we're already partners on the ranch, but I want more than that. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours, and we're building this life together not just as business partners, but as family." "Garrett, you don't have to answer now. Take time to think about it. But I needed you to know that I'm not just trying to fill a hole Catherine left. I'm trying to build something new with you, something that's ours and nobody else's. I love you, Alara. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Alara looked at him. This man who'd been so broken when she met him, so closed off and afraid, who'd learned how to open his heart again, how to fight for what he wanted, how to choose love over safety. And she thought about the girl she'd been when she stepped off that stage 6 months ago, terrified and desperate and convinced she'd made a terrible mistake. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who owned land, who'd saved lives, who'd built a home through sheer stubbornness and refused to break when breaking would have been easier. "Yes?" she said. Garrett blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need you or because I'm trying to replace anyone, but because I love you, and I want to build a life with you, and because saying no would be stupid when I've already got everything I want right here." The kiss he gave her was full of joy and relief and promise. They stood in the barn surrounded by the sounds of animals and the smell of hay, and Alara felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. They were married in the spring, in the garden Alara had brought back to life. The whole town came. Everyone who'd called her the wrong bride, everyone who'd gossiped about her, everyone who doubted she belonged. They came and watched Alara and Garrett exchange vows under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and afterward Frank made a toast that made half the guests cry. "To the woman who saved this ranch," he said, raising his glass. "Who taught a stubborn man how to love again. Who proved that sometimes the wrong person showing up at the right time is exactly what fate intended. To Alara Hale." "To Alara Hale!" the crowd echoed. Margaret was there too, having come west one more time to see her friend get married. She pulled Alara aside during the dancing and hugged her tight. "I'm so happy for you," she said. "You deserve all of this." "So do you. Have you thought about what you want to do with your life?" "Actually, yes. I've been taking accounting classes back in Philadelphia, thinking about opening my own bookkeeping business. Something that's mine, that I built, that Vincent can't control." She smiled. "You inspired me. Watching you take a chance on yourself made me realize I could do the same. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us. Two women who were supposed to follow the rules and instead wrote our own." They danced until the stars came out, and when everyone finally left, Alara and Garrett stood on the porch of their house, their home, and looked out over the land they owned together. "Happy?" Garrett asked. "Deliriously." "Good. Because I've been thinking about the future, about what we want to build here. And I wanted to ask, how do you feel about children?" Alara's breath caught. "Children? Only if you want them. I know you've been through a lot, and I know becoming a mother is a huge commitment, but I can see you with a baby in your arms, teaching them about the garden and the animals and how to be stubborn enough to survive anything. I think you'd be an amazing mother. I think you'd be an amazing father. Yes, I want children. I want to fill this house with laughter and noise and all the chaos that comes with family. Then that's what we'll do. We'll build a family to match the ranch. We'll create something that lasts beyond us, something we can be proud of." The months turned into years. The ranch grew and prospered under their joint management. Alara's garden became famous throughout the territory for its produce, and she started selling herbs and vegetables to other ranches. Garrett expanded the cattle operation, bought more land, hired more hands, and 2 years after their wedding, Alara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Catherine Hope Hale. "For the woman who taught me how to love, Garrett said, holding his tiny daughter with tears streaming down his face. And for the foal that brought us together when we were both too stubborn to admit what we wanted. Little Catherine was stubborn from the start, demanding and fierce and absolutely fearless. She had Garrett's gray eyes and Alara's dark hair, and from the moment she could walk, she was following her mother around the ranch, learning to garden and care for animals and speak her mind. A son came 2 years later, Thomas Frank, named for the ranch hand who'd believed in Alara from the start. And then twin girls 3 years after that, who they named Clara and Rose because they were born in the spring when the garden was blooming. The house that had been so cold and empty, filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of children. The ranch that had been dying came back to life in ways nobody could have predicted, and the wrong bride became the right woman in every way that mattered. On Catherine's 5th birthday, Alara took her daughter to visit Catherine Hale's grave. They'd buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, where she could watch over the land she'd loved. "Who was she?" Catherine asked, running her small fingers over the headstone. "She was your father's first wife, a brave woman who came west when it was scary and built a life here. She died before you were born, but in a way, she's part of why you exist." "How?" "Because she taught your father how to love. And when he was ready to love again, he loved me, and together we made you." Alara knelt beside her daughter. "There's room in our hearts for everyone who shaped us, everyone who made us who we are. Your father loved Catherine, and he loves me, and he loves you. Those loves don't compete. They add to each other." "Do you think she would have liked me?" "I think she would have loved you, and I think she'd be happy knowing that the ranch she cared for is thriving, that her husband found happiness again, that the garden she started is still growing." They stayed there for a while, mother and daughter, paying respects to a woman who'd died before they met, but whose legacy lived on in every corner of the ranch. That evening, Alara stood in the kitchen cooking dinner for her family. The twins were playing on the floor. Thomas was helping Garrett with the horses, and Catherine was setting the table with the careful concentration of a child trying to do things right. Through the window, she could see the garden in full bloom, the barn where Hope and her own foals now lived, the land stretching out to the mountains. Frank came in through the back door, older now and graying, but still working the ranch he'd helped build. "Smells good, Mrs. Hale." "It's just stew, Frank. Best stew in the territory." He poured himself coffee. "You ever think about where you'd be if you hadn't gotten on that stage 6 years ago?" Alara thought about it. About the desperate woman who'd arrived in Black Ridge with lies and 14 cents. About the months of struggling to prove she belonged. About all the moments she'd almost given up. "I'd probably be dead," she said honestly, "or close to it. Philadelphia was killing me slowly. Coming here saved my life." "Coming here saved all our lives," Frank corrected. "This ranch was dying before you arrived. The boss was dying, even if he didn't know it. You brought us all back to life." "We brought each other back to life. That's how it works. We save each other." Garrett came in then with Thomas on his shoulders, both of them laughing about something. He caught Alara's eye across the kitchen and smiled, and in that smile she saw everything they'd built together. Not perfect, not without struggles, but real and solid and worth every moment of fear it had taken to claim it. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Alara and Garrett sat on the porch watching the stars. It was their ritual, this quiet time together, and Alara treasured it. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked. "Coming here, dealing with all the hardship, fighting so hard for a place in a world that didn't want you?" "Never. Not once." Alara took his hand. "You know what I learned? That belonging isn't something you're given. It's something you build through work and stubbornness, and refusing to accept that you don't deserve a place at the table. I wasn't the right bride. I was the wrong woman in the wrong place with the wrong credentials, but I made myself belong anyway. You did more than belong. You thrived. We thrived. You and me and the kids and this ranch. We built something from nothing, and that's worth more than any fairy tale ending." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think happiness was about not being afraid. But real happiness is about being afraid and doing it anyway. About taking risks and failing sometimes and getting back up and trying again." That's what Catherine's journal said. I know. She was right. Alara looked out at the land she owned, at the home she'd built, at the life she'd claimed through sheer force of will. The best things in life require the most courage. and I'm glad I was brave enough to fight for this. I'm glad you were too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed. An owl called from the barn. The wind whispered through the grass that would turn gold in summer. And inside the house, 4 children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe, and that their parents had built something strong enough to weather any storm. Alara Frost had come to Montana Territory as an imposter, a fraud, the wrong bride arriving at the wrong ranch. But she'd left that girl behind somewhere in the journey. In her place was Alara Hale, ranch owner and mother and wife and woman who'd proven that the right person isn't determined by paperwork or promises or other people's expectations. The right person is determined by who shows up, who does the work, who refuses to quit when quitting would be easier. The right person is the one who fights for belonging instead of waiting to be invited. The right person is the one who takes the chance even when the odds are impossible and builds a life from nothing but determination and hope. She'd been the wrong bride, yes, but she'd also been exactly the right woman for a ranch that needed saving, and a man who needed to learn how to love again, and a future that was waiting to be built by someone brave enough to claim it. And in the end, that made all the difference.